Wonderful. So let us begin. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Yale-China Association. My name is Nancy Yang-Masvat. And thank you for all coming out today. I see some new faces in the room, so we're really excited that we can have an event that really brings out different members of the Greater New Haven community. So please sit down. We have some extra seats. There's a seat back there. There are a few seats here. Feel free to get comfortable with us. But this is our first Fireside Chat with a Chicagoan. you might, very honored. Yeah, you might think he's actually from originally from Xi'an or Henan, your family, parts of your family, but actually he calls Chicago home. And you do get this reference in the book as well. But it's really my pleasure to welcome all of you here today for a Fireside Chat with Wenguang Huang. He is a Chicago-based writer, a journalist, in fact, but he works a day job with a corporation. Right. It's an unknown corporation. we weren't able to Google stalk that information about you. But he came to the U.S. in 1990 to pursue a master's in public affairs and journalism in Springfield at the University of Illinois. And he also served as a staff member of the New York Times and the Beijing Bureau. He's a regular contributor to all the reputable journalistic publications, the Asian Wall Street Journal, the Christian Science Monitor, Chicago Tribune, South China Morning Post, and the CPR, Chicago Public Radio. But he's began his career really as an author and translating nonfiction works, and also has translated a number of books, including Liao Yiwu's Corpse Walker. And this is his first book, and he describes it as a family memoir. I'm really excited also because the published date was April 25. Today is May 8th, and it's really one of our great honors to have Wen here with us today. And also Oprah Winfrey, also another Chicago native, not a native, you're a Chicago transplant. Chicago has just picked Wen's book as the book of the week. So we're really excited. It's a wonderful book, and we've had it, many of you already have copies of it, but we are having them available for sale, and Wen has agreed to sign copies of it. So that's a wonderful opportunity. Please think about this wonderful book to bring home. But we wanted to welcome formally Wen to Yale-China Association. This is when we have an opportunity as an organization that does work predominantly in China, in rural parts of China, to really come up for a breath of air. To think about what is the bigger picture, what are issues that we find interesting as we do our work in education, in health, in public service, and in the arts. So it's really wonderful for us to share what we think is such an interesting book that transcends 3 generations and also so many of the different vicissitudinal periods in the recent history of modern China. So welcome Wen, and he'll share a few words. We'll do it a little bit differently from some of the other chats we've had. Wen will share a few words about him, and then I'll moderate a conversation with him for about 15 minutes, at which time you can prepare your own questions. And I think any question is okay. Is that right? Yes. Okay, so please prepare your questions, and then we'll have a nice time of discussion with the audience, and then when we'll sign books for those of you who would like to bring a copy home. So prepare yourselves, and let's prepare for a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Wen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. Since we have this great seating arrangement, we can make it more interactive. If you want to interrupt me or have a question, feel free to do so. And thanks, Nancy, for inviting me over. And I just want to make one thing too. That Professor Kang is here today. It's his last day, I heard, at Yale, teaching here for how many, 20 years?
18.
Because the reason I'm mentioning him is Nancy just mentioned the Liao Yiwu book. The first time that I decided to do some writing, and then decided to translate Liao Yiwu's book. And then Professor Kang was the one who smuggled the manuscript out and had it published in Taiwan. Because of him, I was able to access the Chinese version, and I had it translated into English, and today actually just won a major award in Poland, all thanks to Professor Kang. He has a book called Confessions of Innocence in Communist China, and because we were both from Xi'an, and when I was writing the book, I read that book actually 3 times, and thank you so much for doing that. I just, before Nancy will do the Q&A, I just want to say that this book, when I started out as the book, I wanted I have three purposes in mind. The first one is, like it says, it's a family memoir. And because in the US right now, we have read a lot of books about China, about families during the Cultural Revolution, including Professor Khan's. They all had a very dramatic impact because they were persecuted personally, or their parents were persecuted during the Cultural Revolution. But this is more family things, because my family, in a way, we were the beneficiaries of the Cultural Revolution. None of my parents that we were persecuted. But I wanted to use the ordinary person's life, their story, family story, to let people get a picture of what China was like in the 1970s and the 80s, and up to the present, what is Xi'an is like now. In the central part of China, I'm sure most of you have visited. So that's one purpose. The other one is, I've been here in the US for 20 years, and I became a citizen in 1998. And this is more, I want this book to be more of an immigrant story about how we all came over here. We tried to start a new life, and you try to get assimilated, and then you try to forget about the past, and then how at a certain age you deal with your past, your cultures. How do you strike a balance between American and with your past? So this is more, to me, it is more a book about an American immigrant, how you deal with your cultural heritage. So with that in mind, I can just, we'll just talk more as we, during the Q&A. Feel free to ask me any questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. And some of you, who has read the book? Not yet. That would have been very impressive if you had, because it's only been published in it for about 10 days. So in the book, you start off by sharing that you slept next to your grandmother's coffin for over 10 years. Can you share a little bit about why that was the case? Your grandmother was still alive.
This story, when I was trying to write this memoir, I picked a theme which I think is very metaphorical in a way. I picked the story of a coffin because it played a certain important part in our family life. It all started in 1973 actually. My grandmother was 72, and she suddenly realized that she was going to die because there was a Chinese saying that 73 and 84 are the thresholds in life. Most people die during that period. So she got so scared, and she wasn't sick or anything, and she insisted that she wanted to be buried, and she wanted a grand send-off in a coffin, and then to be sent back to her hometown, which to be buried with her husband, who had died about 50 years before. She was a widow the rest of her life. And you know, it might be a very easy thing if she were in the United States, but in China, in Xi'an, is a big urban city that at that time burial was banned in China, and all the funerals were considered something old and superstitious practices, and it was illegal to send somebody home to a different province to get buried. So my father was a very devoted Communist Party member. When my grandmother asked for a coffin, it put him in a very difficult dilemma. And for the next 15 years, and we were struggling with this issue. In order to, my grandmother, she was so persistent, in order to get my father to promise that she would be buried, and she asked to have a coffin made. So my father, he felt very indebted to his mother. He decided to agree. So they had a coffin made, and then in the rural areas, which was very common, and then you could put it in a warehouse. But in urban areas, they didn't have a place to put. So where did they put it? Next to my bed. So I was supposed to be the coffin keeper, and it's supposed to be a very prosperous, an auspicious thing to do, to have a coffin made when you were still alive. And every year you add a layer of black paint to it. And actually it did bring a lot of luck to my grandmother. She didn't die after 16 years after the coffin was found. But this whole thing, it just changed my whole life. That's the story. I try to use this story about the coffin, how our family, what we did with the coffin, and then to tell about family life in the 1970s and 80s, and how it impacted my life.
From my understanding, your father was the eldest son, and you were the eldest grandson, is that correct? So how did that play into the family dynamics, which, you know, much of the book talks about your sister and many of your very close connections with your family, your mother, and the relationship between your mother and father. But how did, you know, it seems auspicious that of all the children, you were selected, and also that your father had the honor of your grandmother living also with your family. Can you share a little bit about the dynamics of being the eldest male?
Great. My father was the only male survivor in the whole family clan. My family used to be a big landowning class near the Yellow River, and my great-grandfather used to be the court official. The emperor gave him a lot of land, so the whole family prospered during the last century. But then in the 1940s, a TB epidemic hit the whole village. Our family, one of the person married a woman from a different village, from a very wealthy family. Everybody thought the guy was so lucky to have married this wealthy woman because the dowry was so great, but turned out that she brought TB to the whole family. And it shows in a very strange way that all the male members died of TB. So my grandpa died when my father was only 2 months old. And my father had an elder brother who died at my grandpa's funeral. So after the whole family died, my dad became the only male survivor. And traditionally, that my grandma was only 27 years old when she was a widow. So in order to make sure that the whole family, the Huang family name could carry on, so my grandmother never married, and then she actually raised my dad all by herself. And then famine hit the region, and then Japanese invaded China, and the life was so hard. My grandma had bound feet, and certain times they backed away all the way to Xi'an in central part of China, if those of you have been there. And Japan, the Japanese troops did not reach that region. So she actually single-handedly raised my father. That's the reason why my father felt so indebted to his mother. And he had to feel like by giving his mother a proper burial, it would be the right thing to do to pay back. And for me, was in the Confucian society, the eldest son is considered the father. If the father passed away, and then the eldest son is taking over. So even after my father died, I was only 22. And then my mom was here, my sister, they were all older. And then the party secretary would come in and then talk with about my dad's the benefit stuff. They wouldn't talk to them, but they would come and talk with me. So it's the kind of the Confucian, the hierarchy system. Because of this special status, because the eldest son and my dad is the only male survival, the male member who survived the whole catastrophe. And I was involved in every process of planning the funeral process, because I was supposed to be the one in the end who will help my father give my grandmother the proper send-off. And throughout, when I was only 9 or 10 years old, each time my dad would plan something very clandestinely, we lived in constant fear because people would find out, and my father's political status being jeopardized. So we spent 15 years, I was always part of every plan. What if in the summertime, she died, what would it do? In the wintertime, what if she died, what kind of plan we would have? So it's like I call the underground network. So we had all these different build-up networks to help with the funeral plan. That's what we did for 15 years.
So can you share a little bit about your grandmother's reaction to the dutifulness, the filial piety aspects of you and your father in terms of committing to her, future funeral? In part, you mentioned on one page is the conflict between your mother and father halfway through. So the planning process where she wants a new coat, but your father spends all this time planning for his mother and being dutiful to the mother, but then in some parts doesn't provide enough in terms of your mother's viewpoint to the children and to his wife.
Right. Because of this funeral took up so much of financial resources, and my father, for 15 years before he died, actually he died before my grandma. That's the whole tragedy of it. And then he was so obsessed with planning the funeral, it almost wrecked his marriage, because I was talking to my sister the other day, we were just reminiscing, like for the later part of his life, they almost lived in separate rooms, separated in a way. Because, so my mother felt like my father should have worried more about the living rather than the dead. But to my father, he felt like he was doing something to pay back his mother. And also my grandma had such a big influence over me. And in a way, she raised me, which is very common in China. If you ask a lot of the Chinese who are here, you ask who raised you, a lot of them, it's your grandmother raised you, because it's the system in China when your parents are at work, the grandparents, they step in, especially the male family. Your dad's mother is normally took over the responsibility. So that's the part that my grandma felt like that the son and the grandson, they should have done to fulfill her wish. Also, she felt like she was doing something for us, because in the traditional way, if she was supposed to reunite with her husband, the whole we would have get blessed from our ancestors, because there was a completion of a full cycle. And so in this book, I actually, in a way, throughout the coffin, I tried to portray two very strong woman characters in our family. One is my mother and my grandmother. They were both born in the year of the tiger. And my dad used to say, and then my dad used to say that the Chinese saying that you don't want two tigers can never coexist inside one mountain. They hated each other, they fought with each other, and because I think my grandmother, she never was married. She was so devoted to my father. I think, looking back, she would never allow another woman almost to take over. Where my father, I felt like I was just talking to Professor Kang about D.H. Lawrence, Sons and Lovers, about my father felt like her mother had such a overarching influence. I just didn't know whether he really actually loved my mother, because there's such a strong influence. And my mother, there was the constant conflicts, especially the coffin was the one that really exacerbated the tension. And when my father was devoted, my mother she wanted to go to Shanghai and need a new coat. My dad said, we have to save money for my mom's funeral. And that, the tension. And also sometimes because my grandmother kind of spoiled my father. Throughout his whole life, he never knew how to cook. He never knew how to do things. One day I came home, I was really hungry from school, and I said, Dad, I'm really hungry. All my dad knew is that, I'll put a pot of hot water in there, your mom will be back, and then we'll boil some noodles. And keep doing 2, 3 times. That's how he was so spoiled. And then my grandmother, sometimes my mother would just tease my father and give him a hard time. My grandmother just couldn't take that. And so for all her life, in the last days of her life, her things would try to teach me how to cook. So in her words, so I didn't have to put up the crap like a future wife. So I remember one night, my grandmother had I had a fight with somebody, which my grandmother got involved, and she felt like she had her high blood pressure. She didn't feel very well. She went to bed early. And then suddenly, in the middle of the night, I'm sure we all run into problems with our aging parents. She woke up everybody. She said, I think I'm going to die. I want to give the last wish. So my father got so nervous, he went out right away to get a doctor. And then we tried to give her some water. And then my grandma said, no, I can't drink water, because for a dying person, if you drink the water, you get choked. I have to finish my last words. So I went there, knelt in front of her, waiting to hear her last words. I thought she would be saying, I have all this money stacked up for you. I was waiting for that whole thing. And then guess what her last words were? Saying, I hope you learned how to cook. Remember my words. In this way, you don't have to repeat the same words again. And you don't have to put up with some woman like your mother. And I look around. Luckily, my mother was out. And then when the doctor came, and the doctor felt her pulse and said, Grandma Huang, you will be able to live to 100. You were just okay. And after that work, and then she just went to sleep. And then sound sleep, we were just trying to get over the whole thing. She was snoring. That's how grandmother was. And then this doctor who asked us every 2 months, she will have some kind of episode. And the doctor would come over here, feel her pulse, give her some medicine, saying this is good for your blood pressure, good for your this, all your illnesses. She would take it. And many years later, I found one time she had an overdose of medicine. I was so nervous, I went to the doctor. I said, what did you give to grandma? What's going to happen to her? The doctor said, oh, just have her drink lots of water, because that's all the vitamins. As far as I can remember, in the 1970s, the doctor would give her some vitamins, but she thought it was the pill for her illness, for her everything. So that's how the tension, I just digressed a little bit to come back to the tension between my mother and my grandmother. And in a way, my grandmother was a very traditional woman. Her husband died at the age of 27, and she was never married. And she was called in China with a faithful widow, because in the traditional Confucian way, that if the husband died, the faithful widow would stay and take care of the husband's family. They would never marry another man. And she raised my father. And and then during the Cultural Revolution, and even though she was one of the called proletariat, the ruling class, and she was helping, she was the maid at a certain point. She was born in a big family, but in order to raise my dad after the famine, she escaped to another city, became a maid so that she can raise my dad. And then her employer became the persecutor. They paraded him on the street. They gave the big house to our family, and then my grandma refused to take the house, said this is not ours. And then they asked her to go and denounce the employer. She didn't want to go, so they sent my dad to go. And then she actually secretly took care of the employees, the children. So she was this very simple and honest woman, but then she was also very, very traditional. Whereas my mother, her time was in the 1950s. And then she was they call the new generation of women under communism. And 1 month after I was born, she left me with my grandmother because she felt that revolution was more important than family, because it was stigma for people to place family above the revolution. And she left me with my grandmother. She would only come home once a month. That's why for years and years, I never had a normal relationship with my mother. And then until she realized that was a mistake, she came back and moved closer to us when I was 9 or 10 years old. But then it was too late. I felt more attached to my grandmother, and sometimes she, the tension, because they both tried to, my mother tried to get back her son. My grandmother wouldn't let go, and then sometimes the tension between them, and then my mom would spank me so hard sometimes. I realized that she was probably getting back my grandmother, and then we started to fight for many years. But then my father died. Everybody expected my mother to be like my grandmother, but she married my dad's best friend in 7 months, and unfortunately, and that's everybody, our relatives, they wouldn't talk with her, but she, stood, she stood firmly, and she moved in with the person. And then, unfortunately, her second husband died a year and a half later of liver cancer. And she actually went out a dating service, which started in China. Because in China right now, it's more for practical purposes. A lot of widows and widowers, they lived alone. The traditional big families, they no longer exist. They started to encourage people to get second, third marriage. My mom was just leading the whole trend, the movement. And she married again the third time. I'm just trying to see the two different women between my mother and my grandmother, how time has changed. And even though she has similar traits, but they totally left different paths. That's another thing that the book's trying to convey.
And if I can explore that a little bit more, in the book around page 223-4, you discuss that sort of rapid change in the 3 generations and all the different thought processes and how much China has changed over the last 80, 90, well now over 100 years. And actually, Yale-China has been around just that long, so we've witnessed it from a very different angle. But it's interesting because your sister is very upset with your mother, that she's now gone to date Uncle Ma, as someone that has been relatively close to the family. and that and you sort of highlight some of the changes that when you were younger, it was forbidden, and sort of the punishment you would receive for being seen in public kissing,
right,
or even just very simple aspects of the public displays of affection were not acceptable.
Right.
And yet over this short period of time, your mother has, within 7 months, remarried to a very close. So that, I just thought it was very interesting to see your sister upset with your mother, and yet your mother being the sort of, it's this sort of switching places in terms of judgment.
Right, I think that my sister's reaction is more like everybody else here. It's probably you are so used to your mother and your own father together. Even it took me a while. Suddenly you see your mother with another man. As the idea, it takes a while to adjust. I remember in the old days when I supported my mother's marriage. The only advice I gave her, I said, if you marry somebody else, you should have him go through a health checkup so that he doesn't. Because for a while they called my mother was a. Is there a phrase here called black widow? Or, right. Yeah. It's like a man killer or something. Because they actually in a way it was very sad because my mother used to be in the neighborhood. So each time before somebody gets married, they have a lot of women coming here to knit the quilt for the bride. It's a very auspicious thing to do. But then after my mother became a widow at the house, they would not allow her to do that anymore because you are no longer considered an auspicious person or symbol to do that. And so she had that image. But from my sister's point of view, even though she was the younger generation, even my brother, who had a living girlfriend, they were never married in China before that was just inconceivable. And then he strongly opposed to my mother's marriage. I think it's just the irony of it. It's like the children themselves, you can do whatever, but when your parents, it's the emotional thing with your own parents, and you just can't. It's hard to see your mother with another stranger, with another person. Even for me, when I went home, I would go to my mom's home. In the old days, I could take off my shoes and then do whatever I want. But when I visited her, I felt like, just like I'm sitting here, I felt very nervous sitting there all the time because you no longer feel like it's your home anymore. That's kind of the strong reaction of that. But for the book, I also want to show people the other aspects of Chinese society is when the communists took over China, they seem to give people the impression that it's a very liberal ideology, encouraged because Mao used to say, women hold up half of the sky or hold up half of the sky, and women were liberated, they were encouraged to work full-time, to leave the home. But actually was more draconian and more puritanical than a lot of other countries, because when most people here who grew up in China will know that in the 1970s, it was very hard to see if a young person like you holding hands on the streets was considered a very immoral thing. I remember when I was in college, and a person, that was even in the 1980s, 1983, there was somebody who was 2 years older. One day, the two of them, they were dating, and then one day we came back from a movie, the door was closed, and we noticed that the girl was inside. And suddenly everybody surrounded was screaming, so what's going on there? And then the political instructor, he was the counselor, he came over here, knocked on the door, they would not open the door. So the counselor actually climbed up to the window and tried to use a rod to saw the clothing on the scattered, strewn on the table. He tried to use the rod to get the clothes out. So the person said, okay, well, if you just leave us alone, we'll let it go. So they finally, the girl actually happened to be with her boyfriend at that time. And after they left, the next day, they had a whole department meeting to denounce the act. They even read the love letters that between them. And after graduation in 1984, the two of them, because in China, the government assigned jobs in the old days, they deliberately assigned the two of them to different places. So it was not possible to show the kind of during the 1980s. But nowadays you see it's probably going to the other extremes. Just like here, you go to the streets, you see those soft porn magazine on the bookstore, and you see younger people. It's so similar to what is here. But I want to show the changes during those years. And in Xi'an, probably. Professor Khan wrote a big story about this woman who taught young people how to dance, right? And there was a private dance club, very intimate dancing. And then she had probably right. And then she also had premarital sex with somebody, and she was executed in 1984, right?
Yes.
So to show you the changes in China during that time. But anyway, so that was through my mom's marriage. I tried to give people a glimpse of the changing attitude towards sex in China.
I'm going to open it up after this question.
Right.
叫流氓团伙首犯就可以枪毙。
So they will be considered a rascal or a hooligan, and then you could get executed.
Right. So I'll open it up after this question. And there are lots of questions in terms of the history during this period of time. Even if you haven't read the book, I think there's quite a bit of insight that Wen can share on that. I have a couple questions, but I'll narrow it down to one, which is more of I'm interested in your personal response. So your father passes away November 30th, October 31st,
right.
1988. Your grandmother then passes away 1 year and 1 month later,
right.
On November 30th, 1989. You mentioned that your father visits you quite frequently in your dreams, right. and then how you're questioning how that carries over into the real world. And then at the same time, on the day your grandmother died, you said that thoughts of your grandmother kept coming into your mind.
Right.
I'm wondering, what connection do you have in terms of thinking through? Was there some sort of connection you had with your father or grandmother? Do you believe personally that there might be some sense of this sort of post-life visits, as many sort of traditional Chinese superstitions do have, that one visits
right.
Family members after they pass? Have you thought through that?
Yes, actually, that's another thing I try to explore in the book. We were born in the 1960s and 70s. It was the atheist communist ideology. Everything in the world, is non-religious. And we didn't have any religion. And our religion is probably the Chinese tradition and superstitions. And as I evolved, I think, sometimes I was a very progressive activist, both in school and in college. We believe in communism because partially it's you have to do it to survive in a communist society. Partially is you receive the education, you believe that's the right thing to do to build an equal society, and this is a world without God. And that's how you were taught. And then as years go by, and then I saw a lot of the funeral arrangements, some of the rituals, and some of the superstitions. You always think they are superstitious, they are old practice, we don't believe in that. And then as you grow older, you suddenly realize you have new perspective on things. And I just realized that sometimes the rituals might be something is not really for whether you believe it or not, or it's not really for the dead, but sometimes for the living, you feel like this is something at least you can do for the dead. I'll tell you a story later on about what I had to do, the changes. But with this, the dream stuff, the superstition stuff, I don't know. That happened to me 3 times in my life, and I still don't know how to explain it. That's why I put it in a way, whether there is the special connection with my grandmother and my father, which I wasn't aware before. For example, the day before my dad passing was I was in school, I was in college, and then so I woke up in the middle of a nightmare, like one of my tooth here, the wisdom tooth, was falling out, was bleeding. So I woke up, and then I asked my roommate, I said, is that some, it's Chinese, we all pay a lot of attention to this. Said, this some kind of a bad omen? And then the person said, oh, somebody in your family might die. I just stayed awake. I jotted down the note on the journal saying, I hope it's not true. So the next morning, I just went to make a phone call. In those days in Shanghai, we didn't have a phone call individual homes. If you want to make a phone call, you have to go to downtown to a big post office there to make a long distance call. So I made it all the way to the city and made the phone call. My dad answered, and then he said, "Oh, I'm okay." I said, "What are you doing now?" He said, "Oh, some Catholic ladies just came in to pray for me. They said it's going to work." I said, "Dad, you're a Communist Party member. I thought you were." He said, "Oh, doesn't matter. Whatever cures me." Because at certain points, they can try all kinds of things on him. They put a frog on his chest, had lung cancer. They thought it would suck the poison out of it, and it didn't work. And then now they had the Catholic ladies went to pray. I said, "That's good." So I thought, I went back to my roommate. I said, the dream is kind of superstitious thing, and I just ignored it. And then I went to participate in this Shanghai International Movie Fest. And then I was just watching this movie. Somebody came in with a telegram saying, "Your dad is dying. Rush home directly." So I took the train. That's one. And when I went home, he was waiting for me. And in the book, I specifically described the heart-wrenching things in the last days. While I was holding him, he passed away. That's one thing. And then my mom was always a believer in the dreams. And each time I started to have dreams, I started to get scared. And then soon after my father died, and then so I just had another dream that my dad just came in from the house wearing his uniform. And then he said, "I'm going to take grandma away." And then I said, "No way." I said, "Grandma raised me. I have to pay back and then treat her nicely." So my dad said, "I'll give you 1 year." He left. And then I called my mother. I just said, "Mom, I had this dream again, really scary." My mom said, "Oh, maybe your dad just wants you to take care of her." And she said, "Your sister also had a dream talking about buying all kinds of cookies for your grandmother." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Oh, when people die, you buy all these smaller, you don't buy a huge portion, you buy 3 of a kind." So maybe that was it. So I got nervous that I was taking care of my grandmother, tried, and then 9.5 months later, my grandma passed away. So there was another thing, of course, my mother, after these 2 things, I still can't find a solution, inexplicable or whatever. I'm sure some of you will run into some things that you can't explain. I just don't know. I still don't know whether maybe it was a coincidence or it was just, my mother, she had all kinds of things. Sometimes it was too much. I just feel like you're too superstitious. Like I was in Shanghai before she passed away. She would say, "Oh, I had a dream that your dad and your grandmother moved to a new place because they were buried together, and they moved to a new house. They didn't even have stairs." And I said, "Oh, really?" I never took it seriously. And 3 months later, she called me. "Didn't I tell you that dream?" And we just got the notice, your grandmother's, they're moving the tomb over to a different place. So I went to visit, and I saw it's right up on the hill. The road was not even paved. So there's something, because each time I did something, I sometimes take a journal. I just wanted to see whether it's correct or not. And there were certain things, it's just, you can't explain. That's why I just try to use that to add more to this, I guess, the supernatural element, sometimes the connection. I do believe, this is another personal thing I believe. Sometimes you don't realize you have a special connection with your parents, even though you have a tension with them when you were young, or you think that your parents, you were alienated from them, but there might be some connection you're not aware of that really bonds you together. That's the message I want to get to people.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. And let's open up for questions. Anything goes, I think, is when I suggested. Yes.
Have other members of your family read your book, and what have they thought?
Yeah, I asked. Luckily, none of them read English. So that, and I think because somebody asked me, say, "What are you going to translate into Chinese?" I'm not going to have it translated. First, when it's translated, you have to rewrite it. And there was so much family stuff. I just feel so vulnerable. I feel like writing in English in my mother tongue is kind of protection. You feel like you could detach yourself from it. But for the Chinese to read, it's just too personal. But my sisters, they provided most of the information. While writing the book, I took 2 trips back. We reminisced together because I have a little bit of photographic memory stuff. When I reach certain things, I remember certain things, what a person wears and what happens. But then, everybody's memory, sometimes your perspective is different. So I went back and talked with them a lot of the information they provided, but I never shared the information. Even my father, I think, if he has read the book, he would be horrified because he was a very intensely private person. My mother used to love to gossip with her girlfriends in the neighborhood. My dad used to call her the community radio. And in case, I was just jokingly say, I said, if my dad had read my book, he would call me the national public radio. The whole country knows.
The whole world knows.
Oh yeah, so I was wondering what inspired your interest in public affairs journalism, so much that you would come to the United States to study it, and also working for the, press outlets you have in China. I guess, is there ever a disconnect between the stories you personally like writing about these intergenerational trends and developments and what is typically assigned to you?
I'll answer your first question. The public affairs was, when I was in China, in 1986, I studied English literature, and I was lucky enough to be sent to, I was telling Nancy the reason I don't drink coffee was because English literature was too hard, and I used to have problems writing English essays. I always waited till the last night. I couldn't get it. I kept drinking coffee, and after graduation, I said I will never drink coffee, and I will never do English literature again. But I just kind of like writing, and to me, journalism was relatively easy because you interview other people, and then you write down and then reorganize it. But I was lucky. I was in journalism in 1988. That was the time when China, right before Tiananmen Square, and there was a huge movement by the journalists to press for a press law in China. There was the openness, and some of the papers were, actually a lot of the papers were allowed to write freely for a while, and even the freely, relatively speaking, compared to before. Because in China, we were taught in journalism school that the media, the mouthpiece of the party. That was the standard line. When the first day, journalism school, you read the book, that's what you should know. But at that time, the first time people started to talk about how journalists as a watchdog, and then you should monitor, what the party was doing at that time. But the most things that impressed me was a book called All the President's Men. I'm sure a lot of people in journalism here, they were inspired by the same book. I was a tour guide in Xi'an, and I met this lawyer from New York. We started chatting, and before he left, he was very grateful because I took him to some places that normal tourists wouldn't go, so he gave me a book, All the President's Men. I read about it. It was kind of very fascinating, so how journalists could bring down the president. So I started to nurture this fantasy of doing journalism. And after Tiananmen Square, I was a participant, and I applied for a school, and then I happened to be in Springfield, Illinois. There was a program by Senator Paul Simon. He started this program to train journalism to cover the legislature, which I was very interested in. And I was the first international student to be enrolled in the program because it was very local politics. And that's how I got started in journalism. But now I write for Fortune, sometimes New York Times, and some of the pieces, Fortune, I do more of the business side of the stories now. And sometimes I write a lot about intergenerational conflicts, what's happening now. But a lot of times, you have no choice. The editor said it was really interesting, the story. But luckily, when you become a freelance writer, you can find the topics you're interested in. But it is hard to make a living become a journalist. That's why I have a day job with a corporation.
After this book, I predict this is going to be made into a feature film. You heard it here. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, why is it called the Little Red God?
Actually, the original book was called The Coffin Keeper. Because it was my dad, when he asked me to sleep next to a coffin, he told me I was the coffin keeper because in the end I was supposed to lead the procession during the funeral as the eldest son. But my editor thought that you can't give a book during Christmas time to somebody saying, here's a book called The Coffin Keeper. So I said, okay, let's come up with an auspicious name. I said, if we could have red in there, that would be great. So we started experimenting. Red dragon, something on the dragon, something, and then we didn't come up with any one that would attract attention. And then the publisher felt like it's called the Little Red Guard because when I was a child, I was a little red guard. When my father told me to sleep next to a coffin, it was the part about the conflicts. So that's why we called it the name. I hesitated a little bit because I didn't want people to see this is a political book or this is a cultural revolution book. This was a family book. But I guess, but what I depicted in the book is also happening during the Cultural Revolution. And the red, I hope, will bring a lot of luck to the book because it's the year of the dragon. It's also my birth year, and we have to wear wear everything red. I did a story on PR. I got a lot of calls because if your birth year, remember here, if your birth year, and you always should wear a red underwear. And then in China, you go there, you ask people, you say, I want to buy a red birth year underwear. They sell it. I bought a lot of the thing. It's supposed to, the redness, or you wear something red, the redness is supposed to bring you good luck and ward off your unexpected disasters, especially when you travel. That's the thing. Somebody joked with me because they call me Wen. They said, why do you start a birthday of underwear? Anyway.
More questions from the chair, and yes.
I've spent really 30 years of my life in Xi'an, so I cannot wait to read more of your stories. But you, in just the reviews, I saw that your father's ashes were buried in the coffin with your mother.
Right.
In the early 80s, I developed a very close friendship with the Huang family in Xi'an.
Okay.
Same situation where he so wanted to have a burial. And the teachers would come and teach him about the communist way that you can't have the burials. So in his house, in just this one, he only had 2 rooms, there was the coffin covered by the green oilcloth.
Right.
And it was for Huang.
Right.
But there was also Mrs. Huang. And we became very close, but I never asked what happens if he dies and he is buried, what happens to her? Because there was only one coffin. So do you have thoughts on how they might have handled that?
Because normally during that, within a family, as far as my understanding, it's mostly for the man, for the father. And then whoever dies first has a coffin. Because you don't get 2 coffins, right? You normally have 1 coffin, and the next one goes after that. That's normally the one. And normally people pay a lot of attention to their father. It's like the head of the family and the coffin. Because somebody read my book. I was so inspired, told me a story. She was from Taiwan. In 1949, her father had to leave China, mainland China, to go to Taiwan. He knew that it would be many years before he could return to mainland. So he didn't know what to get for his dad. So what he did was he bought a coffin for his dad. He felt like that was the best he could do. It was like the best gift. Can you believe that was you leave your father, you said, Father, I will never probably come back in 30 years, here's a coffin. That was considered a thing that he could do. And then many years later, they gave the coffin to a relative. And he was so upset over this because they felt like that was the best he could do for his father.
More questions from the audience? You mentioned 2 reasons you wrote this book in the afterword. One, to deal with the foolish reticence at your father's funeral in 1988, and then also to rescue an obscure family story. And thinking through just the family nature of this and your relationship with your family and your siblings and your parents, was this therapeutic to write? Was it? How did you feel after finishing the last sentence in this book? Was it cathartic?
It is very cathartic. It's like a cleansing process because it stayed with me for years. I will tell you the story about, probably some of you have heard, some of you have not. The reason, it's a personal reason I wanted to write a book. It was in 1988, my father died of lung cancer. He was 58. And I was a college, I just graduated from college, and I was a university teacher. You know, it was young and arrogant, and then thinking I knew everything. And then after he died, the party secretary came in and said, you are the eldest son, and you've been to college, a prestigious college in China, and you need to say a few words about your father after the eulogy. And I said, okay. After he said that, you were young, you would try to, I said, I have to deliver a beautiful eulogy to impress everybody because I was the only one who'd been to college. And then as the hours was approaching, and I found out that I had problems writing saying about my father. So I looked at his life, and I felt like there was really nothing worth talking about. I said, he used to be a cultural official, and then for years he offended the party secretary, and then he lost his job, and he worked in the factory, a warehouse manager for years, and then the only accomplishment he had was my grandma's coffin. He spent many years preparing for it. He died before my grandmother. So the more I thought about it, I felt very bitter, and I just couldn't say anything. And then I said, maybe at the last minute, inspiration will hit me. And then the funeral started. I went to, the whole family went in there. And then I was very surprised that 400 some people showed up. I said, a lot of people came up to say, oh, your father was a very nice person. He helped me. I was a little bit shocked that my father would have so many friends who would come. And then I was struggling with words. And then suddenly, the eulogy was supposed to be long, but it felt very short that day. And suddenly they said, oh, the son of Mr. Huang is coming to say something. My mind totally went blank. I just went on the stage, and I looked at everybody. I bowed 3 times. I just said, thank you. And I could hear the silence. Nobody said anything. Everybody looked at me, and the party secretary was a little stunned, and then he immediately said, oh, now let's do the wake and walk around the glass, the coffin, and then before the cremation. So I just didn't know what happened later. And then, you know how mothers are. She never allowed me to forget my shame. For the past, after my father's death, each time she said that has never happened to anybody at the funeral. She would tell me that I went to this funeral of so-and-so. The son has never even been to college. She always emphasized, he's never been to college, but delivered these things about their father, made everybody cry. And then she would tell me, oh, I went to another funeral, so-and-so. She didn't say a word, but she sang the famous opera of her father, and she made everybody cry. So it's just always the guilt there. And later on, I realized that it was really, in the whole area, they had a lot of funerals. Normally, nobody has done what I did. Like, didn't have anything to say about my father. And after my mother passed away in 2005, and suddenly the guilt was such that I felt like maybe I owed my father a eulogy. And then as I grow older, when I turn 40s, I realized that more and more the things that I rejected from my father, the things he taught me when I was a young person, and started to make sense. Because when I came to the US, I said the first thing I want to do is do something totally different from my father. I want to be a totally different person. But then as you grow older, you just realize you are your father, right? Just like you are turning your mother. And then I was talking to Professor Kang, he said, right now it seems like he has the invisible hands like guiding me everything, and you act like your father. I went back, people said, you look just like your father, which I hated. But then, and then you just started to develop this thing. You start to appreciate what he, your own father. I'm sure we all gone through the same thing. And I decided to revisit his life, and the more I have this appreciation. And then when I was trying to write about his stuff, now I said, what am I going to write? So I couldn't sleep for about 3 weeks. Every night I started to think about what happened in the past. The old memories started to come back. I would stay up till 4 or 5 o'clock. And then I said, what is the main theme? So I decided to write about the coffin because it had such a big impact on my life. And once you find the theme, it took me a month and a half to finish the book, the first draft. And then I started to finish it. And after I finished it, and I was talking about rituals early on, why I want to mention that. And so Penguin picked up the book, and they decided to publish it. And in April, I had the first copy of the galley. And I had a very strong urge to go visit his tomb. It's almost like when a kid, when you get a good grade, you want to show off to your dad. So what I did was in February, late February, I took a trip. I got my first copy of the book. So I went to visit Xi'an. I went home and I went to the tomb. They said, my sister said, oh, you normally don't visit until the Memorial Day festival in April. I said, no, I have to go. So I brought the book with me. I just went up there, I did a talk, I just said, I'm sorry, that part. And then I finally write the book. Now everybody's going to know about your life. So I put it on there, and I was about to leave. I called my sister. I said, oh, I feel so relieved I finally gave the book to Dad. And then my sister said, no. The Chinese tradition says that you have to burn it in order for him to read it. You just put it there. It's for the living. I said, what am I to do? I don't even have a cigarette lighter. So I went down the hill and got a cigarette lighter from the driver. And I borrowed the driver, and I just started to set it on fire. It was drizzling. And if you notice, whoever burned books, it's very hard, actually. And I did this, I tried, and then finally the cover went off. And then the middle wouldn't go. So soon I ran out of originally was the liquid in there. And it wouldn't go. I just said, well, I just called my sister again. I said, I guess it just wouldn't go. Father, I just jokingly said, as father doesn't read English. He's not interested. And my sister, just try one more time. It doesn't work. Just put it on there. When we go there in April, we'll help you burn the things. So I just decided to try one more time. I was doing this as I was frustratingly trying to light it a couple more times. Now I was so frustrated, I lifted it up, and then a gust of wind came. And so miraculously, the pages just started, the book became like this, and the fire just like this, just like this. And it was very mysterious, and then I looked around and I said, wow, he must really like the book. Because this comes to the fact about the superstition. When I was young, I would think it's so ridiculous. You believe something, you buy a book, you think you send a book, you think that dad is reading it, right? You just interpret it the way you want. But on that day, I have to say that it's very soothing. That's how I suddenly started to come to the understanding. Sometimes when we all have to go to do some silly things or crazy things for different rituals, or go to a funeral, or go to a wedding, or go to something, and you do all kinds of rituals. I just realized it's really not for the other person, rather than for ourselves. It's you feel like you have done something. I guess for me, I felt like I didn't do the speech, and finally the book burned like this. He really probably likes the book. So that was the story.
And can we finish with reading? Would you mind reading a passage from your book for the audience, and then we'll have individual conversations, and anyone who's interested can have Wen sign the book, and then you can purchase a copy. Would you mind doing that?
Sure. I'll just try not to keep you long. Do a very short paragraph. Why do I write about Xi'an? How many people have been to Xi'an? Oh, great. I don't know what the lighting is, but I just have my circle. The lighting is, let me just say. I'll just read a paragraph of what I, if I can't do it probably, I hope you can read the afterword. The light, do you have the lighting here? Oh, can I show the picture of my before I do the reading? Do you have the lighting? I can do the book. I'll just show you what my father looks like in the. Oh, thanks.
You have more pictures. You want to show all your pictures?
Oh, I just. Oh. Yeah, let's just show a quick picture. That's my dad's, my grandma. So the Chinese tradition is that when my grandma was buried, she was they have to relocate it 2 times in China. You know, private development right now, nothing is permanent. Everything you have to make. So this is the 3rd. They have to be relocated 3 times. So the tradition is that the grandmother is buried. My dad's wish, the ashes, the son, you have to be buried next to the grandma, next to where her feet was supposed to be, meaning you're serving your mother in the afterlife. And then my mother's ashes was buried next. So every year during the Qingming festival, in the book I mentioned a lot, in China, those who grow up, you burn those were supposed to be the fake paper money. And then each year you go there, and since I go there, my sister would always say, oh, there was the fake US dollars worth more than the Chinese dollars. Please make sure that dollar. And then they sometimes, they've taken it to far extreme, like during October 1st, the lunar calendar, it's like a Halloween here. You go visit your dad, it's supposed to be, when the winter comes, you send clothing to, and then people start to buy the TV sets. And my sister even bought a paper car, and you burn it and say, Dad, I hope that right now cars are really popular. Just right here. You know, they say all kinds of things, and they buy those different style of clothing in the paper. So this was when I was young, when I first became a little red guard. That was me. That's my father when he was in the 1950s. That's my grandmother. Wow. So that was in 1975. Look at her feet. How old is that? She was 74 in the picture.
She was born in 1901?
1901.
That was the year Yale-China was founded.
Really? Right. Oh, that was the...
Would you like to?
Yeah, I'll just read it. Maybe I can see some of the light from here. Yeah, oh, great. I'll just read very shortly about my impression of Xi'an when I just went there. Our hometown Xi'an was just one boat short of becoming the capital city of China, my late father used to tell me, referring to the period after the communist takeover in 1949, when a political advisory body consisting of delegates from all walks of life decided on communist China's capital city. Otherwise, we could have seen Chairman Mao. Otherwise, we could have seen Chairman Mao easily. The government would have built nice buildings like you see in Beijing, and people from all over the country would have come to visit us. He continued, smacking his lips in regret. Growing up in the 1970s, I constantly heard similar sayings from people who believed that Xi'an was not chosen as the capital city because of the lack of a forbidden city. Only one vote, they would say with a sigh. I searched for evidence and found nothing to support the assertion. Since Xi'an had been the capital city for 12 dynasties, it was not surprising why Xi'an natives would feel that way. It was true that Xi'an does not have a grand forbidden city, home to the emperors and their many concubines. But we have plenty of mausoleums and tombs guarded by thousands of terracotta soldiers. Of China's 231 emperors and 1 ruling empress, 79 of them were buried in and around Xi'an. Emperors would begin scouting for auspicious locations for their burial as soon as they assumed power, and work would begin almost immediately on their tombs, the interior of which resembled a palace, so they could enjoy the same glory and luxury in their afterlives. Empress Wu Zetian of the Tang Dynasty spent 23 years building her tombs, and legend has it that her accession was because the location of her husband's tomb, which nestled between two hills and resembled a woman's breast, and hence a powerful source of the female energy. In March 1975, while digging a well, some farmers outside Xi'an found what looked like a piece of large statue. They reported what they had found, and further investigation revealed that the buried army of terracotta warriors in the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of unified China. In that year, father, a big fan of ancient Chinese history, took me on a company-organized trip to see the recent discovery that's now part of the world's cultural heritage. He said the emperor, my eyes started the surgery. The emperor started building his tomb at the age of 13. Sorry, I just had my eye surgery. Suddenly when I started reading, it started. 700,000 workers labored 38 years to build it. Historians believe the tomb of Shi Huangdi, which has been sealed, was an exact replica of his palace and contains a treasure of unimaginable value. Many of the key builders and craftsmen were buried alive inside the tomb to protect the secret passages. That story, I had nightmares for years. Oh, sorry, I can't.
That's good. That's wonderful, yeah.
No, I just, the second half of the story, which is trying to tell that when I went back to, sorry, I just had the eye surgery and then make me have tears. It's not like I'm so overwhelmed. I am very overwhelmed by your increase. No, I took a trip to Xi'an. What really amazed me was that during the Cultural Revolution, and then the Red Guards, they destroyed a lot of the Asian relics in Xi'an in the name of the revolution. And but still, Xi'an was controlled by a lot of the conservatives, because with like the Midwesterners, they have more of a common sensibility. They protected a lot of the treasures. And also, the first emperor of China was a big favorite of Chairman Mao. He believed that he unified China. So we managed to keep the old buildings and then the architectural style. If you were in Xi'an in the 1970s, you could still see something. And then during the recent years, what I felt very sad is that people now, in the name of restoring the past, and in Xi'an started, I know a lot of Xi'an here, they started to build this town palaces, which, building the place where the town palaces used to be, the Han palaces. And then when you go in there, I don't know, have you ever seen one of those? If you go in there, they look like a Disney World. Brand new and the shoddy construction work, very gaudy, gaudy stuff, the red painting, the new painting. You don't feel a sense of history at all. In the downtown Xi'an, where used to be a lot of the beautiful houses, right now the cinder block buildings, you have Rolex, Chanel, all these big ads. And even the city wall, which the city is very proud of, you can see it's brand new. They just built it, and the pollution because people driving cars. Grandma's tomb has to be relocated 3 times because each time you relocate somewhere, and then there's a new construction building. And even the same thing is happening in my hometown. My grandmother wanted to be taken back to her native village, and now they try to build some Tai Chi museum. And I couldn't even find the cemetery. In the book, I just trying to say, in the old days, cemeteries, to me, a lot of it was the link between your ancestors and your past. And right now, it's both the living and the dead. You have to make room for development. To me, that's very sad. China's you have this huge history. People, in the name of restoring history, you are destroying a lot of stuff. Some of them is not even recoverable. And I just feel very sad in a way that even though my grandma, the whole story, in the old days, the traditional value is that no matter how prosperous you are, the whole family has to stay together. When you die, you have to go back to your hometown. And nowadays, you can't even find your hometown. And everybody is changing so fast. And because in the old days, my dad used to say, the curse on the person is, people say, is I'm going to dig up your ancestry tombs. That's the very insulting thing to say. But nowadays, they are digging up the ancestry, right? So that's what my comment about Xi'an is. And I just wish that, I guess every country, in order to reach a certain stage of maturity, you all have to go through this destructive stage. But I just hope they will soon realize it and then to reconnect with our past. Otherwise, it would be a big regret for me to lose that part of the Chinese history. And then just one thought, if you go to France, I talked to me yesterday, they said you can find a winery. They said, oh, it was built in 1600 and we've been kept this, blah, blah, blah. You go to China, you cannot find a restaurant that said, it's been here for 100 years. You can't probably even find somewhere for 20 or 30 years. It just shows you the development is going on, modernization is going on, but how do we strike the balance? That's the book was about.
Wonderful. And what a wonderful, universal, humanistic exploration. On behalf of the Greater New Haven community and the Yale-China Association, we have a book that started in 1901. It's a little bit of our history for you as a small gesture of our appreciation. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us and also for putting together such a gift to us in terms of China's modern history from a very unique and special and personal perspective. We really are very grateful. And just thank you so much. And Wen's going to sign books, and we're giving a special offer, 2 for $30. So if you purchase Wen's book, you will also get this wonderful centennial history of Yale-China, and those proceeds will go to our work. But thank you so much. And you'll sign over there, please. It's a wonderful book. It has a lot of different insightful aspects. And also thanks to Wood Creek for